Produce of sea to land, produce of land to sea. He who doth not in time, scant shall be his share. Seaweed being cast on shore, bestow thou being of bestowal. Produce being brought to wealth, O Christ, grant me my share. Hello, welcome to the History and Folklore podcast, where we look at different folk beliefs through history and how these beliefs shape people's perceptions of nature. Today we're looking at seaweed, its importance historically, and the folklore that surrounds it. Seaweed was once considered to be a fairly important staple to survival, particularly in the Celtic nations of Scotland, Wales and Ireland, and was an important element in the production of food, either through fertiliser, as cattle feed, or to be eaten by humans. It was also often dried and used as fuel for fires. In Brittany, the proper method of preparing seaweed for the fire was to gather the seaweed in September, grind it up, mix it with cow manure, form the mixture into flat cakes, and then stick those cakes into the walls of houses to dry. There is evidence that seaweed was eaten by residents of coastal settlements in Britain and Ireland for 4,000 years, with the practice becoming less common in the last 50 to 100 years. The earliest written evidence of gathering seaweed for food in these countries comes from the Isle of Iona in the 6th century and is attributed to the Irish saint Columba, in which he describes gathering dulse, a type of seaweed. It takes the form of a short simple poem that says, "Let me do my daily work, gathering dulse, catching fish, giving food to the poor." Seaweed was generally seen as a simple, nutritional food that would be softened with butter and served as a vegetable alongside fish or meat and oatmeal or potatoes. It was considered to be a good food for maintaining health and would be a valuable food for people travelling currachs, a traditional Irish canoe-like boat. Seaweed would be collected on stops and cooked as they went. Both the Norse Vikings and the Irish St Brendan are believed to have brought seaweed with them to eat on their long sea voyages, a particularly good choice as the vitamin C in it would have warded off scurvy. It was a traditional part of meals on religious fast days, when meat wasn't eaten. In Ireland, it was particularly associated with the Lenten fast on the run-up to Easter, and the traditional Good Friday meal on the western coast of Ireland was seaweed and shellfish. Despite its humble place in the Irish diet, seaweed was obviously valued. In the early Irish law texts that were used to varying degrees from the beginning of early Christian Ireland to about the 16th century, a rock with a crop of dull seaweed was worth the same as a cow, while a path giving direct access to the sea where there was such a rock was worth 3 cows. Part of the reason for its worth was that it was also an important fertiliser. In the past it was difficult to accumulate enough manure needed to fertilise the fields, and seaweed was a common substitute on the western coast of Ireland, particularly for growing crops like potatoes. Harvesting enough seaweed for the fields was hard work. Seaweed would be cut by hand and transported by horse and cart to the field, or harvested by men standing in boats, using scythes specifically designed to cut underwater. Sometimes men would walk into the sea up to their shoulders and would use nets to pull the seaweed to shore. Sometimes large rocks would be placed along the beach to encourage seaweed to grow, increasing the crop and making it easier to harvest. In the mid-19th century, during the potato famine, seaweed became sought after by families headed from their inland homes to the coast in a desperate bid to survive. From this point in Ireland, seaweed came to be associated with the famine, and eventually came to be seen the poor and the desperate. Seaweed was used in similar ways by coastal communities in Scotland. In 1703, the Scottish writer Martin Martin mentioned seaweed in his description of the Western Isles, saying how the natives eat it boiled with butter and reckon it very wholesome, suggesting not much had changed since St Columba's time on the islands. In 1856, John Robinson published an article titled "The Purple Shore" in Charles Dickinson's periodical Household Words, in which he described the dulsewives who sold seaweeds in the streets, saying, "Of all the figures on the castle gate, none were more picturesque than the dulsewives. They sat in a row on little wooden stools, with their wicker creels placed before them on the granite paving stones. Dressed in clean white mutchers or caps, with silk handkerchiefs spread over their breasts, and blue stuff wrappers and petticoats. the ruddy and sonsy Dulce woman looked the types of health and strength. Robertson went on to say that seaweed in this area would be eaten pinched between 2 hot irons, which would cook the seaweed and give it a taste similar to roasted oysters. Alternatively, it would be roasted and served as a relish with meals, and would be eaten by all social classes. The place in Britain that is probably most known for seaweed is Wales, due to the traditional dish known as laver bread. The seaweed for laver bread was cultivated as food in Wales since at least the 17th century, but cultivation is thought to go back much further. Women would collect the seaweed while the men of the town were out at sea fishing. They would leave their homes before sunrise and navigate the uneven rocks and dangerous tides to harvest the seaweed and load it onto carts or donkeys. Laver bread is so associated with Wales that it was awarded protected EU status in 2017, which is given to foods processed and prepared in specific regions using recognised expertise. As well as being used for food for humans, seaweed was also commonly used for cattle feed. In Brittany, it was noted in the early 20th century that paths were created through rocks to allow cows to walk through and eat seaweed without breaking their legs. Similar practices were also noted in Iceland, Scandinavia and the Isle of Lewis. Seaweed has also been used in traditional medicine for a variety of ailments. The jelly found in bladderwrack was seen as an effective cure for rheumatism, bruised limbs and sprains. The seaweed could either be placed directly onto the skin, boiled into a lotion and applied to the skin, or put into a bath. Seaweed baths were common in Ireland and were said to be good for relieving aches and pains. Carrageenan, when boiled, creates a gelatin substance used in jelly puddings and blancmanges, which was believed when eaten to be a cure for coughs, wheezing and sleeplessness. Martin claimed that eating seaweed was good for your sight, in much the same way we think of carrots today. Because of the importance seaweed had for a number of reasons, it is unsurprising that there are a number of folklore beliefs and superstitions associated with it. In Ireland, it was believed that the best time to collect seaweed was the spring tide closest to St. Bridget's Day on the 1st of February, and people would rush to the shore to harvest seaweed for food, fertiliser and medicine. Likewise, it was believed that seaweed should not be gathered on a Sunday or other particular holy days, and there are a number of tales to illustrate why. In one story, a group of men were on the beach gathering seaweed into the night. They worked for so long that midnight soon passed, and they were still collecting seaweed into the early hours of Sunday morning. It was at this point that they were joined by a strange man who worked further down the beach a little way away from them. When they had finally gathered the amount needed and were preparing to return home, the man disappeared and a large wave swept in, washing all the seaweed they had collected and leaving them with nothing for their hard work. Other stories tell of fields fertilised with seaweed gathered on a Sunday, where only weeds would grow. There are also stories of people who obeyed the rules about collecting seaweed being rewarded. One man who refused to collect a large amount of seaweed that washed ashore at the start of the Christmas season went to the beach at the end of the season, expecting to find it dried and rotten. Instead, the seaweed was there, as fresh as the day as it had first washed up. In Scotland, on the Isle of Lewis, there is an annual sacrifice to the sea which is known as Shoney. According to Martin, each family would donate a bag of malt that would be brewed into ale. On a certain night, everyone would meet at the church of St. Mulway before heading down to the beach. One of the men would carry a cup of ale and walk into the sea, stopping when the water reached his waist. He would then say, "Shoney, I give thee this cup of ale, hoping that thou wilt be so good as to send us plenty of seaware for enriching our ground during the coming year." He would then throw the ale into the sea. The offering for seaweed for fertiliser completed, he would return to land and everyone would return to the church, where there would be a candle burning at the altar. The community would stand quietly until a signal was given and the candle was put out. Everyone would then make their way over to the fields to enjoy the rest of the ale. The word Shoney is thought to refer to an old, almost forgotten local sea god, although it has been suggested that it may be a localised version of St. John. A traditional Scottish prayer to be said when gathering seaweed was also recorded by Alexander Carmichael in his collection of Scottish Gaelic hymns and folklore, the Carmina Gadelica, alongside the prayer read at the beginning of this episode. Translated, the prayer reads, "Come and come is seaweed, come and come is red seaware, come yellowweed, come is tangle, come is food which the wave enwraps. Come is warrior Michael of fruitage, come is womanly Bridget of gentleness, come is the mild Mother Mary, and come is the glorious Conan of guidance." In folklore, seaweed seems to have been regarded in an almost entirely positive way, and seems to have primarily protective connotations. The most widely known piece of folklore regarding seaweed in Britain is that if you hang a piece of seaweed outside, it can predict the weather by getting damp hours before rain or storm appears. In the Mabinogion, seaweed is used to symbolise the mundane and ordinary. Gwydion collects seaweed and turns it into a boat to sail to find Arianrhod. He then transforms seaweed into beautiful leather shoes as a means of tricking Arianrhod into giving her son a name. This story highlights Gwydion's skill with magic, as he is able to transform something so everyday and boring as seaweed into beautiful, detailed finery. Bringing a piece of seaweed to the house was considered good luck. A piece of seaweed put under the rug would encourage money into the house and would ensure the occupants would never lose a friend. In Cornwall, seaweed was thought to prevent fires, and strands of seaweed were kept on stands in the home by the chimney. Sailors would also bring a piece with them on board to prevent fires on the ship and to ward away storms. In certain areas of Scotland, it was said to be good luck to draw in a pail of water with seaweed on New Year's Day. Sadly, this protective power did not extend into Orkney. On this island, one of the most fearsome creatures was the Nuckelavy, a spirit of pure evil that was restrained in the ocean by the mither of the sea in the summer months, but stalked the land through the winter months. The Nuckelavy took the form of a horse with a man's torso attached to its back like a rider. Its head was too big for its body, and rolled from side to side as it walked, with one red eye glaring from the centre of its forehead. Probably the most terrifying thing about the creature was that it was skinless, giving the look of having been flayed, and any unfortunate onlookers could see the black blood coursing through its veins. It is known that the smell of burning seaweed enrages the monster, and it will, in retribution, breathe out vile-smelling black air, which causes all people and cattle nearby to suffer from an illness known as mortasheen and wither away and die. So if you live on or visit Orkney and want to try a cooked seaweed snack, best wait till the summer when it's safe. If you enjoyed this episode, or if you didn't, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a review and follow me on Facebook at History and Folklore Podcast or Instagram at History and Folklore, where you can give feedback, be notified of future episodes, and also discover lots of strange and unusual history and folklore facts. You can also get in touch by emailing me at historyandfolklorepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you, and I hope to see you for the next episode.